Today I'll be talking about using AI for research and also in the classroom, although my order will be flipped. I'm going to start with the classroom and then finish up with research. I always like to stress when I talk about AI, I am not an expert. I am learning along with everybody else. I'm not particularly a techie, but this very much falls within kind of my purview, and it's also incredibly disruptive as a technology. So it's something we all need to sort of get a handle on. I will also point out it is 10 days exactly until ChatGPT's first birthday. So it launched only November 30th, 2022. So it's 355 days old, which is kind of amazing because it feels like it's been here forever with the way that we are concerned about it. And today I'm not going to be talking about how students may be using it, I mean, for one thing, we're not really sure at this point. There are certainly students who are writing their term papers with it. I'm sure there are. There are other students who are undoubtedly using it in very legitimate ways. I was on a conference call last week with info librarians from across the SUNY system, and the consensus there was that maybe students are telling us what we want to hear, but the feeling really was it may not be as widespread as initial fears were, that students may be afraid of the consequences of using it. There was some thought that maybe they don't have quite the handle on the technology yet. And also the thought that they maybe are coming across as a little blasé, a little less impressed with it than us older folks who are so dazzled by it. So like I say, I'm sure there are students who are using it in very sophisticated ways to be academically dishonest. That's not my focus today. My focus is kind of to look at, there are things that it does really well. There are things that it does very poorly, and to kind of focus on those. Like, let's teach students about the things that it does, that the negatives, but also use it for the positives, because it does offer a lot of potential. So I want to start with a quote from former CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, who, when I wrote this thing, he was the CEO, but he was fired on Friday, and already is working for Microsoft. Must be nice to have that career. And just today, 600 of the 700 employees at OpenAI signed a letter demanding that he be returned and that the board all resign or they're all going to quit. So this whole thing may be for naught. Maybe ChatGPT doesn't exist next week. But on December 10th of last year, there we go. He sent out this tweet. ChatGPT is incredibly limited, but good enough at some things to create a misleading impression of greatness. It's a mistake to be relying on it for anything important right now. It's a preview of progress. We have lots of work to do on robustness and truthfulness. I'll talk about truthfulness in a second, but I think this is a worthwhile thing to always keep in mind, that we may play around with this thing and it may be really bad at the things that we're trying to get it to do, but those may be things that it wasn't designed to do in the first place. So I have heard people say, like, well, this thing, like, it's terrible. And it is terrible at certain things. And so kind of that's my focus is identify the stuff that it does well, and let's use it for that, and avoid the stuff that it does poorly. So there are specific flaws that have been pretty well documented, but I did want to touch on these because I think these are things that students need to be taught about. The first, the most publicized, are its hallucinations, that if ChatGPT doesn't know something, it will not tell you it doesn't know, it will just make something up. It's kind of like the ultimate mansplainer. Like, I'm going to be really confident and I'm going to tell you what it is, even if I have no idea of the accuracy. There was an internal Microsoft memo that got released, and this is getting back to its truthfulness, that said AI was designed to be persuasive, not truthful. And I can't even begin to wrap my brain around the sort of the amorality of designing a technology to be persuasive but not truthful. But that is sort of the reality of it. And so that's something I think students really need to be taught. Like, this is not a technology that cares about the truth. It does not care about accuracy. The second is there is inherent bias baked into ChatGPT because it was trained on the internet. And the internet is an awful place filled with racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and all the rest of it. And because of that, ChatGPT learned all of that sort of behavior. Now, OpenAI has put up guardrails to control that. So you cannot go into ChatGPT and ask it to write a polemic on white supremacy. It just will not do that. But its bias is more subtle. It's more like I say, sort of inherent and baked in implicit bias. And I have some examples that I'll show of that. And then the third thing that we always need to keep in mind is that as of right now, its information load is outdated. It was OpenAI scraped the internet in November of 21, and they trained ChatGPT on that. And so unless it's stuff that people have personally put into it, it doesn't know anything that's happened since November 21. And every day it gets one more day out of date. Eventually they will do another training, but it costs an enormous amount of money and resources to train these things. So I think they are holding off as long as they can. Eventually there will be WebGPT. I know they are working on it, where it will be hooked up live to the web, and there are some AIs that are hooked up that way. But I think it's important for students to know this information gap, because if they try to use it on something, they may be getting outdated information. If a student wants to research the abortion debate in America, ChatGPT won't know all the seismic changes that have occurred in the last 2 years. It's also important to know this because people are starting to use it as a search engine, like in place of Google, because it's chatty. You can just chat and get exactly what you want. And kind of in that case, like best case scenario, you're getting outdated information, and worst case, it's just making stuff up. So you're getting fictional information. So I had some examples that I wanted to show. I can navigate all of my windows. I asked ChatGPT a while ago to write a literature review about portrayals of fatherhood in 1950s popular culture. And it sort of gave me a little intro, and then it delivered this literature review, 5 sources, starting with Father Knows Best, Family Structure and Family Dynamics in 1950s American Television by Mary Johnson, and then on down through the other 4 sources. All of those sources sound absolutely legit. Their conclusions are pretty good. I will say Real Fathers, Portrayals of Fathers in 1950s Hollywood Cinema sounds like the most real article I have ever heard, and all 5 of them are completely fake. It just made them up. It seems like it really knows general information well, right? It was able to identify like Father Knows Best, and then farther down, Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet, like your holy trinity of 1950s family sitcoms. Again, its conclusions, these all sound legit. It just doesn't have these specific sources. A lot of times academic sources are behind paywalls, they're in databases. They just couldn't access them. And so it just makes up stuff to tell you. So this is pure hallucination. And then I'll also point out the names of the authors: Mary Johnson, David Smith, Susan Parker, Richard Davis, Laura Mitchell. Those are incredibly waspy English names, right? Like there is no diversity apparently in these names. And I think that's the sort of implicit bias that's going on with ChatGPT, that these are the names that it's going to come up with. Clearly my name would never show up in a search like this. And so those are the sorts of things that I think students need to be taught about, because they may be thinking of this thing as a magic wand, and it's going to give me all the right answers. It's going to let me, like, all I have to do is drink beer and use ChatGPT for 4 years. And it is not going to deliver on that sort of promise. And so just some suggestions on how to teach students about ChatGPT and these flaws that are within it. And I guess I should say, I mean, this is on AI, but ChatGPT is the Jello, it's the Kleenex, it's the one that everybody is using. So that's why it's the one I'm focusing on. The first would be to just have students do exactly what I just showed. Have them create a literature review and then analyze the results. See what this thing gives you. This is something that I think could be just a standard assignment in WAYS 102. And it could be a really quick assignment because ChatGPT does all the work. So once students pick out their research topics, you just have them on a Tuesday, give them the assignment on a Tuesday and it's due on a Thursday, go to ChatGPT and ask it to create a literature review on your topic. There are times if you ask it for specific sources, that it will take a real scholar in the field and a real journal, and then it'll invent an article that person never wrote and that journal never published. And so it seems to me like there's basically 3 possibilities a student's going to find. They'll find a real article written by a real person, a fake article written by a real person, or a fake article written by a fake person. And it's just a matter of having students go to JSTOR, do an everything search on the library's website, Google Scholar, and just see if they can find any of these sources. And that would be incredibly eye-opening to see, like, oh, it's just lying to me. It's just inventing things. A second is something that
I just have a quick question. Sure. Do you think that would be a useful way for them to find those keywords, those search words that
it would be? You're jumping ahead, Lynn.
Oh, sorry.
I actually have a sample of that on the next. But no, that is one of the great uses for it, I will say. So the next thing is something that Sheila McIntyre had her students do. She had each of them figure out, like, what is something they're good at, something they know really well. Like, everybody knows how to do something. So she said, it could be Pokemon. It can be how to change the oil on your truck. It's just something. She had a student who, I think they were a licensed nail technician, like doing people's fingernails, and just go to ChatGPT and ask it how to do that thing that you know really well and compare its knowledge to your knowledge. And she said, like, the nail technician was just like, this is all wrong. Everything it's telling me to do is wrong. And so that would, again, be a way to sort of break students of the idea that this thing is a genius. It's not smarter than them. It's not smart at all, is one thing I always like to stress is artificial intelligence is a marketing gimmick. There's no intelligence here. They're predictive text programs. And then the last one, this celebrity heads game. It comes from this website called AIforeducation.io. Hopefully, Karen, we can get all of these links available to everybody. That's a terrific website with a lot of prompts for uses in education, some sort of behind the scenes administrative stuff, some for students. This celebrity heads game is just it's just a guessing game that you can play with ChatGPT. You pick a celebrity and then you have ChatGPT start asking you questions and see how long it takes for it to guess the person that you're thinking of. And this prompt just comes straight from that AI for Education. This first time I played this, I picked Sean Connery as my famous person, and it just started asking logical questions. Is this person real or fictional? Are they alive? They live in the 20th century? Do they work in entertainment? And then it started sort of, I guess, iterating on those. So are they work in acting, in movies, or were they from before the 1980s? And then I will say this third set of questions, I really thought this is where it's getting Sean Connery. So it asked, did they appear as leading roles? Yes. Are they famous for their work in action movies? Yes. Did they ever win an Oscar? Yes. Who else could that be other than Sean Connery? And it guessed Marlon Brando. Who I don't think was ever in anything that could be considered an action movie. So I told it no, and it started asking additional questions. Were they known for their distinctive voice? Yes, that's Sean Connery. It guessed James Dean. And the weird thing is, it seems to be forgetting the questions it already asked, because James Dean never won an Oscar and James Dean wasn't ever in an action movie. And so it seems to use the preceding questions to ask new ones, but then it forgets what it already asked. It guessed Charlie Chaplin.
It's kind of an action movie.
The weird thing, I think he talked in 2 movies. And I already said he has a distinctive voice, and he was a silent movie guy. It's sort of guessing more. Steve McQueen, Clint Eastwood. The most bizarre one, it asked, were they primarily known for their roles in Westerns? And I said no, and it guessed John Wayne. The worst possible guess you could ever make for that. And eventually it said, I can't do it. Can you give me some clues? And I gave it a few clues, and it got Sean Connery. So for one thing, this is really kind of a demonstration of this thing is struggling the way a human would not struggle to get that answer that quickly. I've played it a few other times. It's gotten there quicker. It's never been really quick, but it wasn't as much of a disaster as this one. But the other thing I will say is, I think I've played it 3 times. It has never guessed a woman, but it's also never asked, is this person male or female? It just has always guessed men. And I don't think it's ever guessed a person of color. It's always just been white men. Going back to the one about action movies and winning an Oscar, like that could be Denzel Washington, but it guessed Marlon Brando. And so I think that's, again, getting to the implicit bias that is baked into this thing. Famous person must be a white man. So those are all things, as I say, that I think are really worthwhile to teach students. So again, they don't think this thing is a magic wand, and they don't think that it's smarter than them. But that having been said, again, I sort of go back to that tweet by Sam Altman, like, hey, these are things not to use it, but there are really, I think it has so much potential for education that it would be kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater if you say, absolutely not, no one can use this thing because it can't guess Sean Connery from my guessing game. So there are a lot of ways to utilize it in education. The first is that it is great at eliminating kind of the grunt work, the drudge work that is always in the way. It is terrific at drafting memos and emails. You can use it to create a syllabus. You can tell it what's the level of the course, what's the subject, what are your themes, give me a 15-week schedule, and give it sort of insert this disruptive student policy, this AI policy, and it'll whip up a syllabus in 10 seconds. And then you can go in and modify and edit and fix it to personalize it, but sort of it's getting the words down on the paper. It is also great at lesson plan and assignment creation. Just to flip back again, I had it. I know a lot of ways faculty are dreading the thought of information literacy. Or if you're teaching something you've never taught before, or you want some new ideas, maybe I want to take a different approach. Ask ChatGPT and it can whip something up. And for this one, I wanted a series of 10-minute lessons on evaluating the credibility of sources, and I gave it authority, credibility, trustworthiness, fake news. And it came up with 4 exercises that each one is sort of building on the next. And then the last one, it can create quizzes too. Now it can't create a quiz from it's not in your classroom, so it doesn't know what you're actually teaching. But if you have a reading that you want students to, like an assessment quiz, make sure they read it. You can copy and paste the article into, or the reading, whatever it is, into ChatGPT, ask it to create 5 multiple choice questions, and it'll do that. Right now, ChatGPT cannot, it doesn't take uploads, can't upload a file to it. There is an AI called Claude that is brand new. It's in beta still, and I'm going to show it at the end. Claude does allow files to be uploaded. So you can just upload an article right to that and say, give me questions on this, and it'll whip them up very quickly. So that's just a way to eliminate, like I say, a lot of that grunt work that we all face. One thing I will really stress is, and I would say this in every instance, however you're using ChatGPT, I would never just take what it gives me and just go with it. Like, I'm not suggesting that. I've got an example of a quiz later on where a couple of the questions are problematic. Like it's sort of one of them has 2 right answers, and those are things you'd have to fix. The syllabus you'd have to go in and personalize and fix up, but at least it gets sort of the words on the page. It gets and all you're needing to do is edit, rather than write the whole thing. For students, and for us really, ChatGPT is also great at research assistance, and I will stress assistance. It is terrible at research. It is not made for research. We already saw with the lit review, but it can be really useful for brainstorming research projects or research topics, for narrowing a big topic down to something really manageable. If a student has, I want to write about climate change, great. What about climate change? And they don't know where to narrow that down, or as Lynn said, for keywords. So again, flipping back, I did that just with food insecurity. Just picked a topic and asked it, can you give me research terms for the topic of food insecurity? And it, some, would be obvious, food insecurity or hunger, but others like food deserts or global food security might not be things that students think of. And then I asked it to narrow it down. It even also gave a little Boolean operator primer for them. And then I asked them to narrow down the topic to be more specific, and it gave me 15 research topics, from impact of COVID-19 on food insecurity to climate change. Now, one of the things that we talked about in that conference call with the librarians is this kind of gets at what do you want the students to learn in your class. If their takeaway is learning how to narrow topics down and come up with keywords and devise research questions, then this isn't something to be allowed. But if the point is, I don't really care how they get to their topic, I want them to learn how to find an article and to craft a paper and all of that, then this is a means that can help them. I was emailing with Tony Beatrice last week, and he said he has students this semester who they either have a topic in mind that they want to research, or they have data, like they want to collect certain data, but they haven't been able to figure out a research question. And he's been pointing them, this is an approach you can take to narrow that down. For me, moving on from that, I think one of the great applications, the great potentials is for personalized instruction, that it really can be sort of almost an individualized tutor for each student. If students, if they're struggling to grasp like a particular concept, they can go to ChatGPT and just ask it, explain this concept to me, as opposed to having to go to Wikipedia and try to read through the Wikipedia article or the textbook and try to read the whole thing. Just if there's one thing they're not getting, you can go right to ChatGPT and ask it to explain that. And ChatGPT is also non-judgmental. So, there's always the fear of people will think I'm stupid. I don't want to ask the professor. My grade depends on that sort of thing. ChatGPT doesn't judge you when you ask it a question. So that's one way. I was listening to a webinar a couple of weeks ago, and there was a professor on there, one of the presenters, who said he had a student who was really struggling to grasp the mitochondria concept of it, and he knew the student was a big fan of Austin Powers. So he went to ChatGPT and said, explain the mitochondria using Austin Powers. And he said, like, the cell was Dr. Evil and the mojo was something and Austin Powers was something. And then you could take that to the student, and it's like specifically made for this one student. It's kind of fun, but it's a connection that the student can make. And so that's sort of the applicability of this thing, that it really can be individualized. Tony also had mentioned that he had a student who this semester who she really knew her stuff, like she really knew the content, but was struggling to get it into a well-structured paper. And so he said, this is an opportunity to use AI for like a positive use. and asked her, like, report back to me what you did. And so she said that he shared to the AI task force what she sent him. And she said she tends to be too wordy. So she used Bard rather than ChatGPT. She dropped her paper into the AI and said, eliminate some of the excess wordiness. And so it did that. Then she gave it the rubric that he had given for the assignment, and it had it insert subheadings throughout her paper where appropriate. And then she went back to her original. She found anything that she thought was important that the AI had cut out, and then she rewrote the whole thing, but using this framework that the AI had given her. And I think that's a really important part, right? She's not just turning in ChatGPT's work or Bard's work in that instance. She's using it as a framework to help her improve her writing. And so, yeah, that kind of gets back to the don't ever turn in just something, whatever ChatGPT gives you. And so the last thing I'll mention here, to wrap up sort of this section on AI in the classroom, some students at some point are going to need to learn how to prompt engineer, right, to create these prompts. There's a quote I have used before in some of these workshops, but a professor was in one of the articles I've read that a professor tells his students, you're not going to lose your job to an AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to use an AI. And I think we've heard that beginning feedback from students. I know I'm going to need this. How am I supposed to learn it? And this is going to end up being a tool that they need in their toolbox as they go out into the professional world. It's kind of funny to think how fast this has changed. Like, I think over the summer, there was talk like prompt engineer might be a career path that people can take. And you could start out in telecom and then move to higher ed and then move to finance. And all your job is prompt engineering. And I think that is not at all going to be the case. But I think the people in those industries are going to need to know how to engineer prompts. So at some point, they'll need to be taught that. I am incredibly sympathetic to the fact that we're all going to have to learn this thing. I don't know. I am terrible at crafting prompts at this point myself. For one thing, I'm not particularly creative, and you kind of have to have an air of creativity to think of this. But if anyone was in the computer science workshop a few weeks ago, Brian Ladd has his ChatGPT set up, so it's like 3 philosophers that all are talking to each other and commenting on what each one's output. And like that blew my mind when he said that. Like, I don't know how you would think of that, much less get it to do that. So I'm totally sympathetic, but it is something students are going to have to learn. And maybe it'll come in 8th grade computer class, as students start coming through. But maybe it's something that has to be worked into their general education too. Not to put even more on the WAYS program than is already piled onto it. So having talked about sort of AI in the classroom, I do want to pivot to AI in research. And again, starting with ChatGPT, and I'm a big advocate when it comes to research of picking the right tool for the job. And right now, that is definitely not ChatGPT. Like I always tell students that pick the right tool for the job. When you're looking for a peer-reviewed article, don't look on Google, go to a database, that sort of thing. ChatGPT isn't the right tool for research. It is good at certain things. It is really bad at other things. There was an article that some researchers wrote where they tried to get ChatGPT to write a scientific paper, and then their article was, what was the outcome of that? And sort of these are essentially their conclusions. It's very good at brainstorming ideas. Again, we mentioned that earlier. It's very good at summarizing individual articles. You could cut and paste the article in and ask it to summarize. But again, Claude is one that you can just upload an article to the AI and say, summarize this. And I've got an example of that. I will say, I think this may represent like an existential threat to the annotated bibliography as an assignment. there has been, a lot of talk about how this technology may be so disruptive that certain assignments that have been around forever are going to have to go away and people are going to have to think outside the box. There was talk about that with term papers. The term paper is dead because of this thing. I'm not sold on that. I don't think it does the job very well. But for an annotated bib, you could go to Claude, upload an article and say, summarize this. And in 30 seconds, it gives you a summary that a student could just come and paste into their annotated bibliography. So again, I take no delight in saying that. There's a real purpose behind annotated bibs, but.
Just a real quick question before I have to leave. As far as like an annotated bibliography, do you have any sense of is it good at all in terms of identifying weaknesses in a paper, or does it take it as a given its quality, if you will?
Yeah, I think it's really it's a thing that summarizes, right? As opposed to, it's one of the things I'll say, one of the negatives is that it can't identify research gaps because it doesn't have all of that information. So I don't think it can identify what is necessarily a weakness unless you tell it. A lot of it is involved in the information you're putting in and the prompt you're giving it. There has been talk about using it for peer review because there's such a backlog of papers and there aren't enough peers. And it's sort of good at certain things, parts of that, and bad at others. I think if a student just said, what are the weaknesses of this paper? I don't think it would be able to identify.
Yeah, maybe only unless the paper itself admits its weaknesses, right? Yeah.
If it's sort of able to spot, oh, hey, here it is. It's the thing that they told
One
me.
One limitation of our paper is da-da-da.
Right, yeah. So the other thing that they hypothesized, that they didn't actually do it themselves, but that it would be good at qualitative research or a qualitative analysis, that if someone has done a bunch of interviews, you could take the transcripts, you could drop it into ChatGPT and give it parameters in the prompt. Here are the things that we're looking for, and it could really quickly zip right through all those transcripts. The parts that it's bad at, one is anything that requires original thinking because it is incapable of original thought. Again, it's bad at identifying research gaps. It is, of course, a travesty when it comes to literature reviews. But what you could use it for is to summarize individual articles and then create the literature review that way. You put it together based on their feedback. And I have read that it's currently incapable of conducting empirical scientific analysis, but you can give it data and give it a prompt, and it can organize the data and find commonalities, I guess, in there. So that was sort of their conclusions. I think the long story short is ChatGPT is not the thing to use for research, at least not right now, and probably never, because again, it's not built for it. But I wanted to close by just showing a handful of AI platforms that are built for research. All of these, well, Claude is not, but these other ones are specifically designed just for research. And they use machine learning and AI and all of that working behind the scenes to identify papers, relevant research, and so forth. And again, we'll have to get these slides out and made public so everyone has those links. But the first one I did want to mention is Claude, which again, this is essentially a chatbot like ChatGPT. But you can upload up to 5 articles or 5 files at a time. And I uploaded one from Dr. Yu over at SUNY Canton, and this gave me a very quick, accurate summary of her article. I also uploaded one of the transcripts from one of my information literacy videos and asked it to write multiple choice questions, basically to see if somebody actually watched the thing. And it did a really good job for the most part of coming up with these. And these sort of assessment questions I'm terrible at, so I'm grateful to it. I was really interested, it actually invented some wrong answers, which surprised me. It wasn't just pulling stuff out of the text. So for this one, the correct answer is B, this speech by Cesar Chavez, which I referenced in the video. I also mentioned textbooks as a tertiary source, biography of John Updike as a secondary source. I never anywhere in that video mentioned a book about the Vietnam War. It just came up with that itself. But I will also say the next one down, Frederick Douglass's My Bondage and My Freedom. Both B and C are right. Like B, it represents Douglass's own views and words, so it is a primary source, and memoirs are always primary sources. So this is a case where I would need to go in and come up with another wrong answer, essentially. So that's getting back to the don't ever trust don't ever just run with whatever ChatGPT gives you. So the next one is Semantic Scholar. Semantic Scholar is sort of an AI version of Google Scholar. It is really specific to scientific literature. And I have to say, when I first started playing around with it, I could not figure out why you would use this instead of Google Scholar. But it does have some differences, one of which is that Semantic Scholar only accesses open access articles. So there's good and bad to that. The good is any article you find in here, you will immediately have access to. The bad is you won't see stuff that isn't open access the way you do with Google Scholar, and you just order it through interlibrary loan. But if I see here, but one of the intentions behind it is to make scientific literature more easily digested for people like me who don't know anything about science. And so it does things like some of the time, it'll create a too long didn't read of the abstract. So you've got your abstract here, and this is just a one sentence summary of the abstract. But then you can see like the next one down, it didn't do that. I honestly don't know why that is. But it also does things like it pulls all the tables and figures out of the paper, so maybe they're more easy to understand without the intimidation of all the text. It has the links to the PDFs. It also has this. I'll say this really confused me when I first started using it. It has citations and references, which of course are synonyms. The citations are the cited by feature from Google. So these 8 articles that you come to down here have cited this article, and then the 84 references are its own, that article's own references. And then it also has related papers. And I'm not entirely sure how it comes to these conclusions, because this article is about ChatGPT, and these are both, one about a breast cancer tool and one about a SNAP tool. So it's maybe the connections it's making is with tools, not with AI. But I have to say, I find it a little easier a little less intimidating than Google Scholar with the big giant list once you drill into this. So then we come to Elicit, which is with an E, not Illicit with an I, which I think would be a very different website. Elicit is a pay site. And you can see I've already run out of credits for the month of November just doing this much stuff. But it lets you, so it'll find papers. I have not tried, I ran out of credits before I could extract data from PDFs. But it'll also find lists of concepts. So as far as the papers go, it goes out, it searches for papers for your topic. It gives you this top summary of the top 4, and then individual sort of one sentence summaries of the abstracts for the rest of them. And then if I had more tokens, I could continue to load more of these. I find actually the list of concepts to be more useful in that it's going to go out and search a whole bunch of papers. I think it searched 60 for this, and then located 252 concepts within that, 110 of which were unique. And then you can just scroll down here and you get the ChatGPT and data science, and here's that article. One of them, idea generation, I think it had 4 articles under that. So it sort of groups them together, but it's a nice way to see, again, drill down into this topic that I'm researching, that maybe I wasn't identifying. What are some of the subtopics? What are some of the more specific ideas that I could be looking at within this field? The other three, which are, I'll flip back here real quick. Open Knowledge Maps, Connected Papers, Research Rabbit. They are all data visualization programs or platforms. This is Open Knowledge Maps. I opened it up. It takes about 30 seconds to do a search. And it creates a knowledge map of all of the ideas or the concepts about whatever the topic is that you're searching. And so what's really nice about it is you can see and identify things that maybe you weren't thinking of. So for me, looking at this, I would immediately go to ethics, library, information science, academic writing. Maybe I'd go to this one too, ChatGPT and education. But maybe I never even think about, peer review or curriculum mapping. So it can show some of those connected ideas that you're not even thinking of. And then you can, again, just drill down right into the individual articles. Connected Papers is, this is another pay one. I have already used up my oh, great. Am I logged out? See if it'll let me log in. Okay, never mind. I really like Connected Papers. That's great because it's the one that I like the best. But I'm not logged in. So, and I don't want to waste more time with technical difficulties. But it creates a knowledge map of papers and connects them all together, kind of grouping them according to their topics. So I had a paper on research in ChatGPT. It had sort of one cluster on gamification, another cluster on flipped classrooms, and then it shows they're color coded by their age, the size of the circles, by their impact. And it does very similar stuff to Research Rabbit, which is the last one I'll show. A lot of people I've heard really love Research Rabbit. It's a bit like Spotify, kind of considered itself the Spotify of AI research, in that you create a collection of articles on a topic. And then I can just pick one of the articles and go to similar work. And it gives me sort of this cluster of interrelated articles on that topic. And I can even do a timeline. The timeline isn't great just because of the size of my monitor, but it'll show sort of where they all fall in the timeline, including this one, which I think I'm going to actually track down and read because it's from 1979 and it's about machines who think. And so these are all, like I said, some of those librarians last week and other folks I've heard on webinars really love Research Rabbit, which most of these are free. Like I said, Connected Papers and Elicit are ones that you need to subscribe to. Connected Papers, I think, is $5 a month. So that's something that I can really see using, especially to help students in areas that I'm not familiar with. So I guess I got through everything I wanted to get through, despite a half an hour of technical issues. Like I say, I think my focus is really to identify the things that AI works well at and use it for those things and warn folks away from the things that it's really poor at, but utilizing it for some of its concepts that it really offers. Because there is a lot of potential with this software or this technology. It's just also potentially incredibly disruptive to the way that things have been getting done.
I know with the ChatGPT, when you write a paper, or if a student wants to have it write a paper for them, that sometimes the sources are not real sources.
Right. Yeah.
But it does. So for these websites that you showed at the end here, do they not have that problem?
Yeah. These are not generative.
They're not.
No, they are searching actual like open access articles on the web.
I see.
And some of them, I know some of those for Open Knowledge Maps were pay articles.
Oh.
So they are they're not inventing stuff.
Oh,
These are just using AI, like the machine learning, all of that kind of stuff, the way AI operates, to identify, like, if this is one paper, what are other papers that are like it?
mhm.
And that's how, like, Research Rabbit works. That's how Connected Papers works. You feed it a paper, like, this is a paper on my topic,
Yeah,
and then it'll find other articles like that for you.
it's more like a database.
Yeah, yeah. But it's also it's much more specific, I think, than if you just sort of do a keyword search in a database. It's really making those connections, and connections that you might not. Like, I was looking at that ChatGPT research article, I would never think like flipped classroom or gamification, but it's
Yeah.
also dealing with like those arts connections to education.
Hmm.
Hi, Brian, this is Karen. We have a question from an online participant, and I think it goes back to the example you gave related to Austin Powers. Thanks for that. That was a good one. So this person asks, if they are asking a question, for example, to explain a concept, but ChatGPT is not trustworthy with information, i.e. makes things up, is this not a concern?
Yeah, I think I have had that thought myself. I think it gets back to the way that ChatGPT knows general information very well. What it invents is the things that it doesn't know. And so if a student asks, like, explain Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, right? A concept like that, it will know. What it would invent is if you were to ask it something specific about a source that it hasn't consumed. And it'll just make stuff up in that case. So I once, just playing around with it, there's that Russell Crowe movie, The Pope's Exorcist, that came out, and just this summer, and I asked it to write a review of that. And the review it gave me was the most bland, generic. It said, like, it has a credited screenwriter. So stuff like that, because it doesn't know that information. But if it's the general information, it's more trustworthy in that case. That is something I have had that thought with. Like, do you need to double check that? I certainly would, as the instructor, if I was giving them here's Austin Powers explaining mitochondria to you. If a student goes, I don't, if a student goes to it and asks, explain the mitochondria to me, I wouldn't expect them to double check it. And so I do realize, like, that's one of the concerns, but I think because it knows general information really, really well, because it's consumed all of Wikipedia. It's consumed all of the internet, essentially. It's just the hallucinations seem to be it filling in the blanks, filling in the gaps of the where it doesn't know anything, and then it'll. I don't know if it's eager to please or if it's mansplaining, which are two wildly different things. But either way, it tends to fill in gaps with made up stuff. That's been my experience with it.
And that's actually the point you made, especially about it being a professor in the driver's seat with a student participating, but also observing that fact checking and really validating whether that is an appropriate way to give an example using Austin Powers. And I've heard of other professors having ChatGPT create something in Taylor Swift's voice, or create, lyrics about a concept using, that genre. I guess you might say there's even a genre that we can call the Taylor Swift genre. And I think what also this affords educators to do is to, rather than have students write an essay, have them critique an essay written by ChatGPT or another similar generative AI tool. And I think we discussed that during Jenica's discussion presentation as well. But yeah, I think inviting students in and inviting their critical eye, as you suggested earlier with that example, have them start. I think you said one of our colleagues, was it, Dr. O'Brien?
I didn't.
Oh, someone in the Pathways program that was using ChatGPT with students telling them to look at something that they already were experts in, the students themselves.
McIntyre. Yeah,
Oh,
Sheila
McIntyre.
McIntyre.
Got it. Don't know what I brought Ireland into the. Okay, I'll stop talking now.
Well, the one thing I'll also say, that the Taylor Swift thing, that raises interesting ethical questions also, because there's all of these issues with right, intellectual ownership and the fact that they consumed all these books and songs and movies and stuff, and they didn't ask anybody for permission. And I've had that thought, like, Taylor Swift didn't give you permission to copy her voice, or right, but it's just doing it that way. And I can go to it and say, write me jokes in the style of Patton Oswalt. And I'm like, you didn't say that was okay, as far as I know. So that could even get to an ethical discussion of this as well. Like, here's a way that we can understand this through the voice of Taylor Swift. However, is it okay that we're doing this because she didn't say yes? Yeah, it's a really,
The brave new world.
it is. It's a really interesting. I think there's just so many ethical issues on top of all of the. How are we going to use this? It's going to
Authenticity.
make things. Yeah, the annotated bibliographies won't be, or assignments will need to be changed and shifted. And I remember being in a webinar last week and somebody mentioned that, and you piped in and were like, "Yay! Think outside the box," because it does provide that opportunity to break away from things that have been done a certain way for decades and decades.
But if you're teaching a writing class, I don't know if Karen can hear me, but you're teaching a writing class and you tell them to, rather than write an essay, critique a paper, when do they do writing? Like, when do they learn to write? You know, when do they, or is it not needed anymore? I don't know.
Yeah, I would say that's the suggestion I gave is an awareness raising activity as part of the learning process, but it certainly wouldn't replace the writing process. Yeah. And even in terms of an annotated bibliography, I have that assignment in one of my graduate courses, and it really wouldn't change anything because the students have to connect the resource to their own area of interest, their own expertise, and they have to make that connection constantly. So, but yeah, I think certainly as an awareness raising learning activity, to have them critique that output is valuable, just as we have folks critique other work, great works or not so great works as part of the learning process. But no, absolutely not. I wouldn't have that replace actual creation by a student.
Yeah, yeah.
I will say, when I was in library school, every single class assigned an annotated bibliography. It was just like, oh God, not another one. And with some of them, I am sure it was just, I don't know they got to do something, annotated bib. And in those cases, it's like, this is sort of what we're talking, like breaking away from, like, make those students do something that's actually productive.
Creative.
Yeah, or
engaged.
think a little like outside the box. But then there are other times when it's like that sort of, or looking for the weaknesses in this paper, or connected back to your own research, that the annotated bib is really serving an incredibly valuable purpose. And then ChatGPT or whatever AI, Claude, whatever, can't do that part of it for them. So maybe it can summarize stuff real quick, but
Can't evaluate.
yeah, you can evaluate something on a
Think
3
about what
sentence.
applies to your argument.
Yeah.
This was great, Brian. Thank you so much.
You.
I love the direct examples. How we have thought about AI has just changed so much, even within the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, as to how do we figure out a policy to get rid of it, to let's think about how this is a tool to help us think critically, and to make sure students are aware. I think the examples were great. So And it does have its role and purpose, and it's really important for us as educators to make sure that students understand what those parameters are, just like you expressed. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and it is funny thinking back to where I was thinking about it in August, where it really was like, oh, this is the doom of education, to where I'm at now, where it's not going away. I mean, that's what we, you can't hide your head in the sand and pretend, right? I don't know if it was one of these many workshops I watched, somebody said, this isn't one you get to ignore. Like, so we're going to have to engage with it, but just engage with it in the most positive way possible. And some of that will be sort of like AI ethics. And when is it okay to use this and when is it not? And I will say I was thrilled earlier this semester. There was an art history class and I was talking about plagiarism, and I brought up something new that I never talked about before, an AI. And I said, like, it's not real clear if it's quote unquote plagiarism, because plagiarism is stealing from another person and it's not a person, but whatever, it's academic dishonesty, don't do it. And I was so thrilled because one of the students said, well, yeah, plus you're plagiarizing from the people whose stuff that it consumed in the first place. And that was like such a great thing to hear a student say, and to have thought of that, because I hadn't brought that up, that topic up or anything. It was just like, oh, hey, by the way, don't use this thing to write. It's could be considered plagiarism. And so it seems like some of that AI ethics is hopefully seeping in. As I say, I think the ethical issues around this stuff are as fascinating as sort of its applicability.
Well, my hope is that when we start working as a group on policy, that we have students from every department in the room, because these are the folks who will be dealing with this hands-on in the workplace as educators, as political scientists, as people creating their own music. And the more our students get hands-on practice developing policy that affects them, but they'll be involved in this process of really high stakes application of these sticky and uncomfortable issues. And that's what makes this such an incredible gift as an innovation, because it affects everybody. There's nobody who's left out. And yeah, we want people in the room who can harness this rather than just use it as not even as an assistant, because it's not a true assistant if they're just doing the work for you, because it's not your work. So
yeah, and
anyways.
I will, of students, I watched a seminar right before the beginning of the semester where a professor was talking about how he has each of his classes determine their own AI policy, and he gives them a reading and they discuss it, and it must be, he probably hands out the reading first day of class, and they discuss it on the second day, and then they vote on its usage. And so for every one of his classes, he has a different AI policy. But he provided examples and none of them were abusive. It was, we're allowed to use it for brainstorming. We're not allowed to use it to write the paper, that sort of a thing. They're now invested. They came up with that policy themselves. And so they're much less likely to break the rules that they played a role in establishing.
I agree, Brian. And we had students in the room last time who brought up the topic of bias in their own personal lived experiences, and we need to hear those. And so as we turn the corner into 2024, for everybody who's listening to this recording and attending right now, please think about folks that you think should be involved and invite them, and whether they know about generative AI or not, or if they have any experience with it, doesn't matter. Everybody's got skin in the game, so to speak. So hopefully our work will expand and be even more inclusive and hands-on and minds-on, and we can do maybe a series of workshops with, say, 3 or 4 15-minute demonstrations like those great practical concrete examples you gave us today, Brian, and also maybe have students leading the way for some of those as well, and hopefully staff and admin folks as well. So